We need to talk about the U.S. women's national team. Soccer. All right. Last week, the number one ranked U.S. women's national soccer team advanced through the group stage of the Women's World Cup with a 0-0 draw to number 21 ranked Portugal. Now, the casual observer might look at that and think, a goose egg's no fun, but advancing is good, right? Well, it's a little worse than that for the U.S. national team, and it gets a lot worse. You might have heard by now that they received quite a bit of criticism for their performance, and it wasn't just like, hey, let's hustle a little harder. It was scathing, including remarks from my childhood crush Brandi Chastain hours after the match.
And we have to be better in just respecting the game, for Christ's sakes. This game deserves more than we've given it. It's a beautiful game, and we have almost bastardized the hell out of it.
And Carly Lloyd, a member of the last two Women's World Cup winning teams.
I have never witnessed, and just seeing these images for the first time right now on the desk, I have never witnessed something like that. There's a difference between being respectful of the fans and saying hello to your family, but to be dancing, to be smiling. I mean, the player of the match was that post.
The players and coaches obviously were not thrilled with these remarks because to them it sounds like an attack on character. And it kind of is to suggest that an athlete didn't give their best. They're not saying that they threw the game or anything, but they are saying that they weren't in the right headspace and it affected their performance. Is this a fair accusation to make of human specimens presumably at the highest level of capability and dedication to their craft? Well, on a biological level, humans, yes, this is very big picture. Humans reward and confer accolades upon certain traits and achievements. Most notably, effort. That voluntary suffering that pushes a person past their perceived limits, right? We call that grit and determination. It's the intangible quality that goes beyond what you could ever figure out on paper. And it's the reason we watch sports. Instead of a weekly broadcast from the laboratory about who's got the highest IQ and the best muscle density and fast twitch responses, we care about the unpredictable. And we're inspired to know that it is possible to unlock some hidden capacity and reach for something better. When Johnny Underdog pulls a miraculous performance out of his butt in a clutch situation, we hail Johnny as a hero because he's shown us what we can be at our very best. So what is this intangible thing that apparently everyone except the U.S. women's national team is convinced they did not bring to the field this past week? I mean, if it's fair to say that someone did show grit and determination on a particular day, there's got to be a right way to say that someone didn't. Now, I think a lot of people are looking at this based on just this performance and the moments immediately after. I think there's a trend that goes quite a bit further back. So let's talk about this U.S. women's team. And the question that we are all asking.
How did it come to this?
The U.S. women have dominated soccer for about as long as they've had a national team. You might remember the 1999 Cup-winning team, courtesy of Brandi Chastain's iconic Cup-winning moment, a meme before we even called them memes. But this actually wasn't the first time that the U.S. got to hoist the trophy. The women first won the tournament in 1991, back when soccer barely got TV ratings in the United States, and the broadcast was entirely in the hands of the host country. So, barely anyone was watching stateside, and expectations were not high. The U.S. squad was comprised mostly of collegiate athletes and was coached by UNC coach Anson Dorrance, who utilized an attack-heavy formation and a general strategy that could be described as, well, yeah, I mean, why not? In his words, we were going to win every head ball, we were going to win every tackle, and we were going to win every 1v1 contest when we were running at defenses. In other words, be the best. And that's exactly what they were. So, how was a country that was never previously known for soccer able to completely dominate on the world stage? Well, if we look across the world stage at when any given nation launched a women's team in relation to the accomplishments of its men's team, very few fielded a women's side until decades after its men's team at least advanced past the group stage. But the U.S. women were winning championships before the U.S. men were even on the radar. Up to the 90s, they'd only ever won one World Cup match, and that was in the 50s when the world was black and white. The relative advancement of women's soccer in the U.S. could be attributed to the impact of Title IX regulations, which mandated equal opportunity for women in school sports, of which the most economical choice for many schools and for many individuals was soccer. So between 1980 and 1990, female participation in soccer grew fourfold. That dramatically expanded the pool of talent that would go on to potentially make the national team and to fuel each other to become better. In other words, the US gained an early advantage over most other nations by growing its talent pool more rapidly through equal opportunity. Women's soccer made its Olympic debut at the 1996 Games in Atlanta, so the US team finally got to draw a home crowd and put on a show. They won the gold medal against China in front of a packed house and then got to host the 1999 World Cup. So that's an even bigger stage that they now have the opportunity to spread the game on. Once again, they face China in the final.
This is the single largest women's sporting event in the history of the world.
And that's where we get the group of legends who span more than a decade of U.S. women's soccer, turning its stars into household names. Mia Hamm, Michelle Akers, Brandi Chastain, Julie Foudy, Christine Lilly, whose goal line clearance in the final caused a permanent disruption to the rhythm of my heart. She's also the only one who I ever got to see in person because she played for the Washington Warthogs of the Indoor Soccer League, fun fact. And of course, Brianna Scurry, who was the hero of the penalty kick shootout. We won't mention the fact that she was about 6 feet off her line on average. The Chinese could have gotten away with it too. It was a lawless wasteland, but I digress. This squad made U.S. soccer famous. A squad that had previously received zero media attention and was totally okay with it, was now setting the tempo for the rest of women's soccer.
We came home, we thought we had just conquered the world, and there was like one media person there.
2003 saw the new generation of talent overlapping with the original Cup winners. Sadly, they were knocked out of the semifinal match by Germany, but they won Olympic gold the following year, perhaps signifying that the next generation would be able to carry the legacy of the 99ers. Then in 2007, they had another disappointing World Cup and a big old dust-up within their own ranks that quite honestly makes the comments of the past week look mild.
It was the wrong decision, and I think anybody that knows anything about the game knows that. There's no doubt in my mind I would have made those saves. And fact of the matter is, it's not 2004 anymore.
Then some much-needed changes, then another Olympic gold, courtesy of new kid on the block, Carly Lloyd. In the 2011 World Cup, the US sees Brazil yet again in an unforgettable match where Baby Looney Tunes version of Megan Rapinoe serves up a long ball late in extra time for Abby Wambach to send the US to the semifinals. Then after tearing through France, the US goes into a dramatic final against Japan in one of those games so intense that win or lose, you're going to be better for it. They lose in penalty kicks. But again, as per tradition, they win the Olympics the following year, surviving the semifinal on a goal by Alex Morgan, who quickly began to enjoy superstar status. By the 2015 World Cup, her face is on everything. She is the player that kids want to be. Now in that tournament, the US is still playing good soccer, but they're getting into some close battles against teams that they would have once beaten soundly, because the rest of the world is simply getting better. They are like the kid who always dominated House League and is starting to realize that the other kids are catching up as they grow up a little bit. Every game of the tournament is close until the final, where the US makes Japan look completely helpless, as embodied by this unforgettable 50-yard keeper chip from Carly Lloyd. Their dominance in the final completely wipes out any memory that this was a very bumpy road. And this, in my opinion, is where things start to go horribly wrong. They go into victory tour mode. They start stacking easy opponents so that they can carry the momentum, the good vibes, and, a 100-game home unbeaten streak. What could possibly go wrong? Cut to December 2015. It's a bittersweet moment as the national team prepares to send off Abby Wambach in deserving fashion. Obviously, they'll defeat China, who's no longer the foe they once were, for the second time in a week. So the emphasis is on getting Wambach a goal in her final match.
At the half-hour mark, another opportunity for Abby.
Yeah, I love this little through ball. Abby takes a great first touch, cuts it inside to her dominant foot. Doesn't strike it with her left, though. Tries to get something with the outside of her right.
The U.S. looks sluggish and disorganized as they take every chance to play a long ball toward Wambach, but nothing connects. They only kick things into gear after the Chinese net a stunner in the 58th minute, and oh shoot, we could actually lose this. That would be awkward. Well, it only gets worse from there. After the USA staff decides it's time to sub Wong back so she can get a standing O in the 71st minute, then Abby takes her time removing her cleats, getting hugs all around. The US resumes a very sloppy exhibition and sees its home unbeaten streak end at 104. Commentators are trying to play it off like this is somehow poignant and meaningful, but it's kind of eerie. As is this.
Forget me. Forget my number. Forget my name. Forget I ever existed.
Okay, sure, Abby, we will forget you and forget the notion that we were ever a soccer superpower esteemed by the world. The mentality of the team completely shifted, and it seemed like it was probably time to disengage from victory tour mode, line up some better, more challenging opponents, and maybe even step out of the spotlight for a bit. Oh, what's this? Someone has completely different plans? Okay then. Now, wherever you may stand on the issue of should a national team player respect the national flag of the nation who afforded them the opportunity to play for that nation at a national team function, think about it from a completely unbiased point of view. Is division good for a team, in your opinion? Does this sort of division seem like it would be good for a team? Unifying, perhaps, or completely deconstructive? When you look at this image from 2016, it feels like the team is very awkwardly divided, all the while embroiled in an off-the-field dispute with U.S. Soccer Commission as to whether kneeling for the national anthem is acceptable, which in sports terminology we would call a distraction. And I have a degree in sports management, so that's how I know that. Now, that's not to say that the individual who sparked this gesture intended to be a distraction, but it certainly created one. And however sincere she may have been in her stance, this definitely had a negative long-term impact. And I think Carly Lloyd agrees on that.
What made this team so successful throughout the years is we stepped in between the lines and we fought for one another, whether that was a player in front of you, the side of you, behind you. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter what you looked like. It didn't matter what you stood for. It didn't matter what car you drove. And in 2015, winning a World Cup obviously put us on a really big stage, and endorsements started coming and the spotlight started coming. And I just saw a shift in people's mindsets. It became more about what can I do to build my brand off the field? What can I do to get an endorsement deal, and less about what we have to do when we step in between those lines.
And we started to see a trend where individual personas were more celebrated than on-field contribution, all the while fame was being conflated with talent when that clearly was not the case. In fact, some of the players garnering the spotlight were probably declining in their on-field abilities. All I can tell you from firsthand experience is that as I was sitting in RFK Stadium in March 2017 watching the U.S. fall miserably in the She Believes Cup, a shameless cash grab of a tournament, but I digress, I felt like I was watching a scrimmage. It was worse than subpar. They couldn't even place in a tournament that they hosted, and the other nations had to fly in to, frankly, indulge the United States high. A failure, you would think. But here's the crazy thing. Up to a certain point, celebrity/influencer status will sell more tickets, more merch, more ad space than on-field talent. Now, lucky for the U.S. women's national team, in 2019, they found a happy cross-section between declining talent and rising celebrity status, where they were still able to pull out a victory in the Women's World Cup and defer all future criticism to approximately 2023. Rapinoe even got to put up some decent-looking numbers while playing well below expectations, thanks to Alex Morgan drawing a bunch of penalties in the box, and Rapinoe getting to go to the spot and score this weird bouncer. And when she converts a penalty in the final, she is nonsensically hailed as
the face of the tournament, Megan Rapinoe.
And when they finally manage to hold off the Netherlands, let's not even get into the fact that they start celebrating early on the sidelines, which is totally taboo. The U.S. goes right back to booking inferior opponents for home exhibitions, totally hampering their competitive edge and crushing momentum, and then goes on to get knocked out of the Olympics. But then they got to leave on a high note by winning the consolation match against Australia, and Megan Rapinoe was named Vice President of the United States by diehard soccer fan Joe Biden. Casual observers would still assume that the U.S. remains a soccer superpower until they re-enter competitive play. Then comes 2023. Eyebrows were immediately raised after the U.S. only defeats Vietnam 3-0 in a fairly unspirited performance, and the Dutch beat them 7-0, so this didn't bode well for their match against the Dutch. They fell behind in the first half, but they did manage to pull out a draw. So they'd be okay as long as they take care of business against Portugal, which should be no problem. But after 90 scoreless minutes, the first Portuguese Women's World Cup team in history were this close to knocking out the #1 ranked team in the world. So as the commentators are still catching their breath from how narrowly the U.S. just averted disaster, they can't help but notice that the players seem kind of jovial on the pitch, which might be the first tell that they're not in the right headspace. Of course, that's entirely debatable, but usually when an athlete is less than pleased with their own performance, they're the first to tell you about it. They don't want to be perceived as ambivalent when they feel that they could have done better. They're usually somewhat apologetic, even a bit surprised that for whatever reason, that component that they're always trying to pull out of themselves did not show up that day. They thought they'd prepared, they hadn't, it wasn't there, whatever. They want to be better next time. I'm not saying we can know for a fact that the U.S. women didn't feel that way, but they didn't show the signs of it. At least most of them didn't. Well, there's one appropriate response right there. Oh, would you look at that? But the overall vibe seemed to be relief that they had survived with a draw to the #21 ranked team in the world. Players started picking up on the tone when they went into their post-game interviews that, maybe this wasn't perceived as a great battle we just won because we didn't win. So they started to strike a different tone in those post-game interviews.
We should have put some in the back of the net and we didn't. We own that. We're not happy with the performance we put out there, but at the same time, we're moving on. When
Coach Vlatko Andonovski was informed of Carly Lloyd's comments, he responded, "This team wanted to win this game more than anything else. They put everything they could in preparation for this tournament and every game that they go into. So to question the mentality of this team, to question the willingness to win, to compete, I think it's insane. I've never seen this team step on the field and not try hard or not compete." Not try is an interesting phrase in this context because every soccer player knows that there is a line between showing up intending to give it your best and actually giving it your best. And that's the thing we're talking about trying to unlock. And in soccer, it shows up in very subtle ways. It shows up in your spatial awareness, in your coordination when you're tired, especially, in whether or not you get over the ball enough to strike it accurately, whether or not you look up quickly enough to pass off the ball when you should. And that was definitely lacking in this U.S. women's game. So Vlatko should understand what they're talking about here. Now, Andonovski and Lloyd would both dial back their comments a little bit. Coach Andonovski probably went back and watched the game before conceding that, the team actually performed like crap. Carly Lloyd was probably under some coercion from a network to reel in her comments and to say that, yes, she does, in fact, love and support this team, which I totally believe. But that wasn't really the tone of her initial message, or at least it was some really tough love, and I think she meant it. So within a couple days of all that, it seemed like pretty much everyone agreed that the U.S. did not show the mental discipline that they should have in this situation. But most seem to view it as kind of a recent phenomenon. And I think it goes back to 2015, and they have been declining ever since. But now, the U.S. women have been eliminated from the World Cup. The result has nothing to do with a lack of effort. In fact, I have never seen a team so outplay another in a sporting event of any kind and still lose. Clearly, the U.S. women took a lesson from last week, but they still did not manage to find the net. The only thing I could possibly criticize is the choice of offensive substitutions, but that's not really even worth belaboring at this point because this is the cruelest result you could possibly have. I think this can only mean one thing for the U.S. women. Effort is not going to be the issue in the future. But for some of them, it might be too little too late.
I mean, this is like a sick joke. For me personally, I'm just like, this is dark comedy. I missed a penalty.
Now let me be clear. I have also accused the U.S. men's national team of playing beneath their own ability. Once, ironically, against Portugal, in what should have been a historic win in the 2014 World Cup, where they played 90 minutes of beautiful soccer, but lacked the urgency in the dying seconds to chase the play back into their own end, and dropped what really could have been one of the most memorable wins in their history, thanks to the local ABC affiliate for capturing my reaction. I was also mad in the same tournament when Chris Wondolowski shanked a tap-in that should have tied it up and possibly sent us to a semifinal, only because his post-game comments were that this would somehow make him better as a player and make the team better. No, not at this stage. And then, of course, when the U.S. was shocked by Trinidad and Tobago in the final qualifying match for the World Cup 2018, where they failed to produce their maximum effort because they didn't seem to know that it was even statistically possible to get knocked out that night. But what we see when a men's player or team underperforms, especially if they show a lack of discipline or character, is major immediate consequences. The team gets a facelift, the player gets booted, the coach gets replaced. Whatever has to happen is going to happen. At the very least, you make a misplay or you shank a shot when you should have passed it off, you're going to get one of these. And that's no fun when you play soccer. You didn't see many of those in the women's game. There's one. This is largely because the men's game has had longer to develop, and players have faced tighter competition from the youth level, and most have not been absolutely dominating their opponents for the majority of their career. And while the pool of women's talent has grown immensely, they still haven't been forced to adopt the mentality that absolute excellence is the standard. And players still make decisions on the ball that seem to reflect they underestimate their competition. Well, that didn't work too well for Germany. The US isn't the only nation that faced a shocking elimination from this tournament. So the world stage clearly is getting better and more competitive. We're going to have to grow with it. I mean, does the US women's organization care enough about being the top team in the world to do what they have to do to refocus their priorities in order to maintain that status? If they don't think there's a problem on the field, they're sorely mistaken. If they don't think there's a problem off the field, they're sorely mistaken. I mean, for a team that seems to care very much about image, their image is hurting right now because the cat's out of the bag. So let's see what happens. It's going to be interesting one way or another.
All of the good and all of the positive and all of the fame and all the fortune and all the attention that you get is based off of one thing, all right? It's not because you're incredible as a person. It's because you're incredible as a soccer player and you win on a consistent basis.
One thing's for sure, grit and determination are having their day right now. As always with this channel, I'm going to end this video with a giveaway in keeping with the theme. Confetti from the 2019 U.S. Women's World Cup celebration parade with a certificate of authenticity. It's mostly shredder from a corporate shredding machine, possibly from somewhere in the U.S. Women's office or some building in Chicago. But hey, memorabilia for the real collectors, on theme. Will we ever see confetti again? Who knows? Comment below, and thanks for watching.